Hello and welcome back again to Backtrack's F1 podcast with me, your host, Jodie. Thanks very much for joining me today. I can only apologise, this episode is a little bit later than usual. I did say in my Spa preview that this episode would be a little bit late due to some family commitments. So before we get into everything that happened in Spa over the weekend, can I just ask, could you please give me a like, a subscribe, a follow on social media? Links to our social media will be in the show notes. If you could give us a little review on your podcast provider, a shout out of any kind, pop onto our socials and come and have a little chat. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you. So in my preview, I touched on the fact that I did think that the new regulations would not suit Spa, that we might actually see a lot more harvesting, a lot more super clipping, and would it affect Spa as the spectacle that it usually is? And overall, I would have to say that yes, I think it did a bit. I think there was a lot of good things to take away from this race weekend. Was it an absolute banger race? No. But it was a good race. They can't all be banger races, can they? We have to have that mixture where some races are a little less exciting. But I really wouldn't say that this was a not exciting race. I still think it was quite enjoyable. But you could definitely see in Sector 3 that the drivers were backing off, that they were having to harvest, having to decelerate through that Sector 3. Which is a real shame because this is a circuit that's made to be raced around. So it does compromise it quite a bit. So, free practice 1, we had a reserve driver taking the drive for Alonso. Jack Crawford managed to get behind the wheel of Aston Martin again, and setting the early pace was the Red Bull. Now, they reverted back away from their version of the Macarena wing and gone back to their standard wing, and I think there was some question as to how that might affect their weekend, but overall, I don't think that it seemed to have a detrimental effect at all. Now, when it comes to Spa, obviously, a lot of eyes were on Hamilton. He's won here 5 times. And also, Charles Leclerc is no stranger to this track. He had a win here back in 2019. And Max definitely led the way in free practice 1. Hamilton behind him in second and Leclerc in third. There was a little bit of drama in free practice 1. Piastri had a hydraulic issue, which meant that he sat out some of the session. A little bit of back and forth between Kimi Antonelli and Carlos Sainz this weekend. Sainz unintentionally got in Kimi's way and Kimi called him an idiot and was quite harsh, I think. Nothing that we haven't heard before. I think it's the heat of the moment, all drivers do it. But Sainz did address it afterwards and said that he did think that was a little unnecessary. We had George Russell obviously hoping for a better weekend but complaining of no grip. And he's got just that 25-point gap to Antonelli, which had really put the championship back within his grasp again after Antonelli had a little bit of a string of bad luck. Russell was not the only one struggling for grip. Lawson was complaining of the same. The Alpines and the Racing Bulls, again, quite close. Bortoletto up in 10th in the Audi. That was something to keep an eye on. So the session ended with Verstappen fastest, Hamilton second, Leclerc third, Hadjar fourth fastest, Piastri fifth fastest, Antonelli sixth fastest, then Norris, then Russell, Lindblad and Bortoletto. Now free practice 2 was a bit more dramatic. We had Gasly going into the barrier at turn 13, quite a bad crash, and that brought out a red flag. Big gap between Antonelli and Russell. Antonelli being fastest in this session. Russell only managing to finish 8th. Norris had quite a nasty moment into turn 9, which was very well held. I don't know if you've seen the onboard of that, but that was a well-held moment. Again, Piastri, further issues. He didn't take part for the first 20 minutes of this free practice. Hadjar was really having a bit of a strange weekend. We had a couple of things for him. In free practice 1, he felt that his legs were too close to the steering wheel. Free practice 2, he'd got the wrong visor on his helmet. Turn 14, Max managed to go wide into the gravel and that brought out a red flag because there was gravel all over the track and he was very unhappy with his Red Bull, saying that it was just an unacceptable setup. He was really not happy in there at all. So the session finished with Antonelli again in first, Norris in second, Verstappen in third, Hamilton in fourth, then Hadjar in fifth, Piastri sixth, Colapinto a very respectable seventh, Russell in eighth, Lindblad in ninth and Lawson in 10th. Charles Leclerc actually finished free practice 2 in 11th. I think the one that stuck out for me was Norris in second. Now, obviously, you'll probably know McLaren have had this upgraded power unit ready for a little while to go into Norris's car, but it was well known that once he had this new power unit, it would trigger a 10-place grid penalty because every power unit he takes now will trigger a 10-place grid penalty because he had such a terrible start to the season. He'd used up all his power units. So I think it was decided that Spa would probably be the best place to take on this new power unit and the corresponding grid penalty, because compared to a lot of other tracks, Spa is a decent enough track for working your way back through the pack. So Lando knew wherever he qualified, he would go 10 places down, but there was a good chance that you could still, if you qualified fairly reasonably in the first place, get back in the points. Quite interesting to see things unfold with the Racing Bulls. And I think there's been a bit of a difference of opinions in the way that the Racing Bulls team went about this, because they apparently had upgrades ready, really, really good upgrades ready for the Racing Bulls, but basically only had the package available for one driver or the other. So had taken the decision that neither driver should take the upgrades until both drivers could take the upgrades, because they wanted to be fair. And apparently Lindblad and Lawson disagreed with this. So Racing Bulls laid down the challenge that whoever qualified the highest at Silverstone could have the upgrades. And I would imagine Liam felt fairly confident going into qualifying at Silverstone. I mean, at the sprint in Silverstone, he out-qualified Lindblad. But unfortunately for him, Lindblad actually out-qualified him in regular race qualifying for Silverstone. So Lindblad got the upgrades, and they certainly seem to be very, very effective upgrades. But good on Lawson that he's still, even without the upgraded power unit, is still hanging on in there. So free practice 3, this was a session where Lewis Hamilton hit the barrier at turn 13, and there was some question as to whether the car would be ready for qualifying. In fact, he actually said that he'd destroyed the car. Fortunately, the team were able to get it ready for qualifying for him. Charles Leclerc had a really scrappy session, seemed to be fighting the car and not comfortable. George Russell was complaining again of lack of power on the straights. And notably, Lando Norris was second quickest again. Max was still pushing the limits, going wide again at turn 9 and into the gravel. Thankfully, no red flag this time. Hadjar had a moment where he ended up stalled in the pit lane and then complained of being hindered by Stroll out on track. So, at the end of free practice 3, Antonelli was again on top, Norris was again second, then Verstappen, Russell and Hamilton. 6th place was Leclerc, then Piastri, Hülkenberg, Bortoletto and Hadjar in 10th. Really good to see both the Audis up there in that session. So moving on to qualifying, really in Quali 1 there was nothing especially to report. Everybody went out and set a time. I think probably the most interesting thing to report was that Lando Norris actually topped this session with the fastest time. So we're definitely enjoying that upgrade, and it's definitely giving some pace. He looked very, very pacey in all sessions. So it was good to see him there topping that session. And in Quali 1 we lost Lance Stroll, who finished 22nd, Alonso in 21st, Perez in 20th, Bottas in 19th, Ocon in 18th, and Albon in 17th. It was a good fact to see who would go through to Quali 3 between Lawson and Bortoletto, with Bortoletto actually claiming the last place in 10th, and Lawson losing out by 0.038 of a second, and which pushed him down to 11th. Hülkenberg had a hydraulic leak again, and in this session we lost Behrman in 16th, Sainz 15th, Hülkenberg 14th, Colapinto 13th, Gasly 12th and Lawson in 11th. So then we got to Quali 3, and this is where it really got interesting, and the early pace was definitely set by the Red Bulls. And with 8 minutes left to go on the session, Lando Norris was on provisional pole. Time whittled away quite quickly, and with just 1 minute and 30 seconds to go, Lindblad and Verstappen were both showing very, very quick pace. And then in the last 30 seconds, we really didn't know who was going to take pole. It could have gone in any one of a million different directions. Initially, Verstappen took provisional pole, and then Antonelli immediately took it back with a lap that was 0.3 faster. Russell threw down the gauntlet but could only manage 4th. Lindblad then was on an absolute stormer and was actually fastest in the first sector overall and ended up 7th. Piastri then pinched his 7th. Difficult to say where Lando Norris would have ended up had his last lap not been aborted just before the finish line because he ran wide. So I think he would have been well in the mix as well. But as it was, it finished with Antonelli pole, with Verstappen 2nd, Norris 3rd, Russell 4th, Leclerc 5th, Hamilton 6th, Piastri 7th, Lindblad 8th, Bortoletto 9th and Hadjar in 10th. But of course, despite the qualifying, as we know, Norris qualified 3rd, but that translated to 13th on race day. Hadjar also had penalties, which meant that he started right from the back of the grid in 22nd. So Sunday rolls round, it's race day, and right from the off, there is an absolute scrap between Antonelli and Verstappen in the first lap. Verstappen gets in front, runs out of steam on the Kemmel Straight, and Antonelli steams past. At the end of that Kemmel Straight as well, Hamilton and Russell have contact. Now this brings out a yellow flag. And we saw pretty quickly that the incident between Hamilton and Russell had been noted because obviously it ended Russell's race. He got clipped by Hamilton, or he had contact with Hamilton, ended up in the gravel trap, and that was the end of George's race. As I may have mentioned before, I am neither a fan nor a hater of George Russell. I think he's a perfectly good driver. I think he's a very good driver, and he seems like a perfectly nice person. He does seem to be quite a divisive figure. There are a lot of people that dislike him, it seems. Now, some of them are just, dislike anybody for the sake of disliking them. Some people do feel a certain way about him for quite legitimate reasons that I can understand. I don't really feel one way or the other about him, but I really, really, really did feel for him on Sunday, because a little bit like last year when Lando was being told that he was washed, he was finished, he never had what it took in the first place to become a world champion, and that his teammate was absolutely walking all over him despite having the lesser experience. And I hated to see that for Lando, and I don't like to see it for George either. I don't think he's been put in a very enviable position. He had Lewis, 7, what some would say 8 times world champion, as a teammate for all those years, and kind of had to play second fiddle to him, but never gave up, never backed off. And then obviously last year he took on the role of showing Kimi the ropes, and from what I could see, he seemed to be quite encouraging and quite kind to Kimi, when he could have been quite insular and to himself and kind of said, well, figure it out for yourself, kid. But he seemed to be genuinely quite helpful to Kimi. And whatever is going on this year, I wouldn't like to speculate. I've heard lots of theories about what is going on at Mercedes, from the probable down to the absolutely ridiculous. But something isn't gelling for George, and it does seem really, really unfair. And I felt like coming into this race, knowing that gap had come down to 25 points, I felt like that must have been a light at the end of the tunnel for George a little bit, that there was still a chance. There was still a chance at this championship, that this wasn't insurmountable. I think his biggest challenge is the fact that he still doesn't feel that the car is right. I think a 25-point gap is not great, but if you feel like you're finally at one with the car, you finally understand the car, you know how to set it up properly, you know how to get the best out of it, and you know you can challenge your teammate at every touch and turn. 25 points isn't nothing, but it isn't everything either. But I think where George is struggling is he's still not one with that car. He still hasn't got that car figured out, or whatever else is going on, it's just not going George's way. I did feel very, very sorry for him on Sunday, in the same way that I remember last year seeing Norris sitting on the hill at Zandvoort after he had that DNF, feeling very much like that was championship over at that point. And that defeatedness, that sadness, I think it's not very nice to witness. And I felt very much for George in that circumstance. I think that's a real pity now that he really does have. I mean, we've got one more race before summer break. He's got a massive hill to climb, and he's coming at it from a perspective of not feeling comfortable with the car, of not really feeling like he's got anything to challenge Antonelli with, and feeling that frustration. And the frustration with the team is like, why is my car so slow in the straights? And like I said, George gets a lot of criticism levelled at him for the way he speaks about other drivers sometimes. For my money, I don't ever think that he said anything too out of pocket, or that didn't at least have a grain of truth in it. But he seems to somehow have garnered this reputation of being a bit whiny. And I can kind of see it. And when people say that, I can kind of see where they're coming from. And I think George is just a personality that you either gel with or you don't. But I do feel that he was very unlucky on Sunday. And I actually admired, I kind of braced myself for him to say, Lewis pushed me off, or this was Lewis's fault. And not because that's George's personality in particular, just because any driver in that circumstance would probably automatically feel that way and assume that about the situation. And I thought that George was very generous, actually, in his thinking, in that he said it was a racing incident. He immediately said it was a racing incident, and he apportioned no blame to Lewis whatsoever. In fact, he blamed the car. He blamed himself and the team for the fact that the car is just so slow in the straights that, like he said, he should never have been in that position in the first place for Lewis to have been able to have that slight contact with him. And now where I've got a problem a little bit with this incident is, again, like I say, I like George. I like Lewis, fine. I like both of them. I'm not a super fan of either. I admire them both greatly. I try and be as fair as I can when looking at incidents in races, and not allow any personal bias or leaning towards which driver I prefer to interfere with anything. And I just felt that Lewis got a really, really rough deal. And I don't really understand why he got this 5-second penalty, because that was a first lap incident, which historically the stewards have always not completely overlooked. If you do something outrageous, outrageous, you are going to get a penalty, but they've always had more leniency with the first lap because of just the way the pack is straight off the line and they're all bunched up and things can happen. So I do feel that Lewis was very, very hard done to with that penalty. And I think it really took the wind out of Lewis's sails quite a bit. So I was very pleased that George spoke up and said that, it was a racing incident, but that obviously doesn't undo Lewis's penalty. So I thought that was a real shame. So that's my opinion on what happened with Lewis and George Russell. In the meantime, while this was all unfolding, Lando Norris had gone from his 13th place grid position all the way up to 9th. Under the safety car, it became obvious that Esteban Ocon had sustained some damage in a little coming together with Carlos Sainz. And he then there was a little bit of wheel rubbing went on between him and his teammate Behrman. And somewhere in amongst all of what happened to poor Esteban, he ended up with a puncture. Now, once racing was underway again, Piastri was absolutely flying, and on lap 5 he did an absolute mega overtake on Hamilton into Eau Rouge, and I seem to remember him doing it last year here at Spa when he qualified second and Lando qualified first, and we'd had the first 4 laps under the safety car because of the rain, and then when racing got underway, Piastri went past Norris on Eau Rouge in a very, very gutsy move. So we do know that Piastri is a little bit of a fan of an overtake on Eau Rouge. But it makes me wince every time because I always think, is this boy going to stick the landing? But so far, so good. However, on lap 8, Charles Leclerc clips Piastri. And this is where my other thing comes in with what I've just discussed about Hamilton's penalty. Now, for me, in this case, Leclerc, who I usually think is a pretty good, clean racer. You can usually rely on Charles when he's wheel-to-wheel racing with people. He's clean and he leaves a space. On this occasion, he did not leave Piastri enough room, and I'll die on this hill. I really, really think that was deserving of a penalty, and I was really shocked when there was no further investigation. I was like, what? Piastri's had the end plate of his front wing ripped off. It's basically all but ruined Piastri's race, and it's so clear. It's not like Oscar did a mad lunge from behind. He was fully alongside, fully entitled to that room, and Leclerc just squeezed him. And I'm sorry, I don't understand why that is not penalty worth, but what Hamilton did was. To me, it makes no sense, and I think this is one of the greatest frustrations in the sport that we love. And we all do love it, don't we? And we all say the same thing and about the stewarding decisions. They are so inconsistent. They're inconsistent in the sense that a 10-second penalty, and I've said this before, can be given last year to Piastri for braking too hard under the safety car, but then Verstappen gets given a 10-second penalty for using his car like a weapon to drive into another driver. And that's the one I quote most often when I talk about the inconsistency in the stewards' decisions. And this, to me, made no sense at all. And I think it was very unfair on Hamilton. I don't think he should have got that penalty. And I think Charles Leclerc absolutely should have got that penalty. And not because I prefer Piastri over Leclerc. I don't. Again, I don't think they're both absolutely brilliant drivers in their own way. But if the boot had been on the other foot and Piastri had squeezed Charles in the same way, I would have absolutely said that Oscar deserved the penalty. And I'm baffled, to be quite honest. It frustrated the hell out of me during the race. I don't understand why one was a penalty and one wasn't. And my youngest son is a huge Piastri fan, and he took that very, very badly indeed. So, by lap 12, Lando Norris had managed to fight his way up to 7th place, and Isaac Hadjar had also managed to get himself all the way up to 14th remember he started right at the back of the grid. At this point, the order is Antonelli's in the lead, Verstappen in second. Then there's a good battle between Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton for the next place. And then on lap 18, there's another virtual safety car. And at this point, Hamilton then questions whether he's on the right strategy, but is told that they are on plan B. The reason for the VSC is there is some debris on the track at Blanchemont. Once racing's underway again, Piastri gets past Norris, and I think I was a little confused at first because obviously they were on very different strategies. Like, was Lando letting Oscar through? But I think it was a genuine overtake, and this put Piastri into 3rd place and Norris into 4th. And then again on lap 20, another virtual safety car for more debris on the track. Leclerc and Hamilton do a double stack pit stop. Of course, Hamilton has to serve that 5-second penalty, but that's it done. But then, of course, there's more drama because as he goes to leave the pit box, when the light goes green, so he's well within his rights to leave, he accidentally runs over the mechanic. It could have been a lot worse. The mechanic reacted fairly quickly. And as you saw, the mechanic leant back in as the light went green. And this was because they realised that they hadn't adjusted the front wing for the new tyres, and he'd obviously got the instruction last second to do that, and that was the tool he had in his hand, was to alter the front wing. And unfortunately, that is not something we want to see happening at all. And there was some speculation as to whether Hamilton would get another penalty for that. Now, my understanding of the rules are that this type of incident is a driver penalty, but it was decided after the race that the team was fined. Again, I'm not saying that I disagree with that. It's just, yet again, inconsistency from the stewards, not applying the rules as they're written down, but are choosing to apply them as they're written down in other circumstances. It's something that really does need sorting out. By lap 23, we've got Verstappen complaining that he's got no grip. And then finally, on lap 31, McLaren pit Lando Norris. He's been out on the hard tyres since the start of the race. Obviously, he's fought his way through the field into a good position, but the pit stop lost him a position because the left rear stuck when they were trying to get it off, and then the new one wouldn't go on either. So that essentially lost him a place, because where he should have rejoined, he should have been in front of Bortoletto and wasn't. So instead of rejoining in 7th, he rejoined in 8th. On lap 34, Antonelli retakes the lead. By lap 40, Hamilton has taken the 4th place from Piastri. At this point, right near the end of the race, Antonelli has a warning from his mechanic that he's already got 2 track limit violations and that he cannot get a third. But that doesn't go on to trouble him very much, as he takes a very, very convincing win. So the finishing order then was another win for Kimi Antonelli, with Leclerc and Verstappen on the podium. Hamilton in 4th, Piastri 5th, Hadjar 6th, Norris 7th, Bortoletto 8th, Lindblad 9th, Colapinto 10th. And behind these were Gasly, Lawson and Hülkenberg. And something that I did think flew under the radar slightly this weekend was 1 or 2 people mentioned how well Lando Norris did to fight his way through the field and get the position that he got. But I think it's worth reflecting on the fact that actually Hadjar finished a place in front of Norris, and Hadjar had actually started right from the back of the grid. So I do think that is very much worth a mention, that as impressive as Norris's race was, so was Hadjar's. So that was your race in a nutshell. Again, not a banger, not one of the best I've ever seen at Spa, but we were limited this year by the regulations, and I think that we have sort of settled into these regulations a little bit, and people have kind of accepted that it's just the way it is. And every so often we get a track that comes up that really shows up the downside to these new regs, and I think Spa was definitely it. Moving on now as we are to Hungary, different kind of track altogether, very few straights, lots of long, slow corners. It's not going to be a problem in the same way. So looking back at my predictions, how well did I do this week? To be fair, not terrible. I kind of got all the right players, but not necessarily in the right order, as they say. My qualifying prediction was that Leclerc would qualify 5th, and he did. I said that Verstappen would qualify 4th, but it was Russell. I said that Russell would qualify 3rd, but it was Norris. And I said that Hamilton would qualify 2nd, and it was Verstappen. And I said that Antonelli would take pole, which he did. So 2 out of 5 there. Not terrible. In the race, I said that Leclerc would finish 5th, but it was Piastri, that Norris would finish 4th, and it was Hamilton, that Verstappen would finish 3rd, which he did. And I said that I thought this weekend the Ferraris would take it. So I said that Antonelli would struggle slightly against the Ferraris and would finish 2nd, and it was in fact Leclerc. And I said that Hamilton would take the win, and it was in fact obviously Antonelli. I do think it's worth noting that while I predicted Norris to finish 4th, I think had he not started from a 10-place grid penalty spot, I think that could have been on, but we'll never know. Now, my hit the mark, I actually picked Audi this week for the hit the mark, and I'm happy to say that, I think I'm going to claim I got that one right. A really, really good finish for Bortoletto, obviously, finishing in the points, finishing in 8th place. It looked good all weekend. It really looked like he really enjoyed his Spa weekend. I did say there was possibly a very small chance that both Audis would finish in the points, and unfortunately not quite. Hülkenberg finished 13th, but it wasn't a million miles off. They both finished, one of them in the points, and a really good weekend for Bortoletto. So I'm going to claim that one. I'm going to say I got the hit the mark right. My pullover and park, I said Alpine, and I can kind of claim it, but not. They weren't awful, but they really, whereas we're kind of used to seeing both Alpines finishing in the points and sort of finishing in between 5th and 10th, quite often like 6th and 8th or 7th and 9th. It was basically 1 point for Colapinto and Gasly outside of the points. And I think really Colapinto had quite a cracking race. It was another one that I don't think, certainly on the coverage we were watching, we didn't see this move. It's something that I've seen since. A heck of a move from Colapinto on Gasly and Lawson. It got in the slipstream of them both. They were fighting on the straight to get past each other, and while they're busy fighting, Colapinto just sails past the pair of them. And how he stuck the chicane after the straight, I still don't really know. I kind of winced, even though I knew that he made it. But that was definitely a very, very brave move on Franco's part. And I'm really, really glad to see that now he's got a bit better car and he's getting the feel of the car and the balance is better for him, that he's really, really showing what he was capable of. If you remember those early days in Williams when he was drafted in halfway through the season, how impressive he was on his debut with these kind of brave but calculated moves. And then obviously it all fell apart a little bit last year at Alpine, and because the car was not good last year, it made Franco look not good. And I think we're starting to see now he's building that confidence back in the machinery he's got now, that he's going for these sort of moves, and we're starting to see the skill level that he actually does have. And I'm fully here for it. I really like Franco. I really rate him. And just a bit of an unlucky weekend really for Gasly. Obviously that crash in free practice. It's just, the cards just didn't fall right for Gasly this weekend, but I have absolutely no doubt he'll bounce back, and I would suspect they'll both finish in the points next weekend. Talking of moves being made on each other, did you see as well the scrap between Lindblad and Lawson? There was a lot of wheel banging going on there. Those two boys are really, really out to outshine each other. They appear to get along so great away from the track, but there's no friends on the track when they're out there together. It's every man for himself. And I think that Lindblad's taking the right approach, because as we know, Liam is quite a strong character. He's quite an aggressive driver. And not in a negative way, but just definitely a more inclined to be more aggressive in his driving style. And he's not going to be shown up by the rookie, but the rookie, Lindblad, is very, very talented and very, very confident. And they're both pretty happy with that car. So it's a really interesting scrap. But I am anticipating that there will be at some point an absolute coming together that takes them both out the race, but we shall see. So now it's time to see who's going to get hit with the flattering ram this week. And it was a tough one, actually. There was a lot going on track, and I've seen a lot of drivers and teams put in really, really good performance this weekend. So it was really, really difficult to have chosen just one person. And absolute honourable mentions to a couple of other drivers, because it is a driver I'm awarding it to this week. Absolute nod of respect towards Lando Norris for putting in the performance that he did and getting that car all the way up the grid. Absolutely brilliant to see him feeling more like his old self in that car, that the car's got better performance, that he looks like he's finding the balance. And I'm really, really hoping that we're going to get Lando really back up there and fighting for those points positions and fighting, well, he has been in the points positions, but fighting for those podiums again, because I love it when things get mixed up. Do I think he's got a realistic chance of the title now? Not really. No, I don't think he's going to retain that title, and that makes me quite sad for him. But I do think there's every chance that he's going to come back swinging. So honorary mention to Lando. And because obviously there's an honorary mention to Lando, I have to give an honorary mention to Isaac Hadjar as well, because that performance he put in at the weekend was incredible. And like I say, it seems to have gone kind of unnoticed by a lot of people, or there's just been the odd throwaway comment of, oh, didn't Hadjar do well? I think he did amazingly. That was no mean feat to come all the way from the back. I mean, yes, there's no challenge in overtaking, particularly like the Aston Martins and the Cadillacs and some of the other teams like Haas that are struggling more at the moment. But once you get past those, that's when the work begins. And he really, really settled into it and did incredibly well to bring that car home the points. But my flattering ram this week, I am giving to Gabby Bortoletto, because as we know, Audi have had their ups and downs, they've had their struggles, they've had a lot of reliability issues, and as we know, last year we had a lot of rookies. We had a lot of rookies come into Formula One, and I feel like sometimes Bortoletto is one that people don't talk about enough, that people don't recognise what a talent he is and how hard he tries, because it's not reflected in the results. And that is because obviously Audi being a newer team, it's an uphill struggle to start with. But if you actually watch Gabby and look at the effort he puts in, his racecraft is really very, very good. He's a really, really talented young driver that, like I say, just goes a little bit unnoticed by people because the results are not there because of the team that he's driving for. But when the car is there, when the car is reliable and he's able to show what he's capable of, he does extremely well. Points in the last race, points in this race, looked great all weekend. I just think he's had a fantastic little run, and I really, really hope that it continues. He seems like a really, really nice driver away from the track. He seems like he's got a good sense of humour. We don't hear a lot about him really, or at least here in the UK, we don't hear a lot about him. But the impression he gives me is of a young man who is just quietly honing his craft. But the raw talent is definitely there. So definitely a big nod of respect to Gabby Bortoletto this weekend. And he gets the flattering ram. So that concludes my Sorry It's Late Guys review of the Spa Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed it. Not long till we're in Hungary. In fact, you're basically going to get my review of Spa weekend, and within the same time frame, you're pretty much going to get my preview of Hungary. Again, apologies it was late. Family commitments meant that I couldn't record when I normally would, but I didn't want to skip one either because I still like to do my reviews. I like to do my previews. I don't want to let anyone down. So looking forward to this weekend. Who do you think is going to go well in Hungary? Who do you think is going to take the win? Will it be another one for Kimi, or will somebody else be on the top step? Let me know what you think on our socials, on YouTube. Leave us a comment with your predictions. So in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy this race weekend because we have 3 whole weekends with no F1 after this. What are we going to do? So let's hope that Hungary produces a really good race with lots of action and lots of things for us to discuss, hopefully all positive. Until then, look after yourself, take care, and don't forget the cheesy tagline, That Tracks F1 Podcast. Track the action, join the fun. Bye!